Yeah.
So our first speaker will be Dr. Harry Lewis, who just introduced himself, who's a practicing therapist and teacher at the New School. He will have an hour. I'm going to tell him when 45 minutes have gone by, so maybe we can have some questions and answers. And he'll be speaking, as your program indicates, on the basic concepts of self-regulation. Dr. Lewis.
Thank you. I think it's always sort of fascinating that you do something on self-regulation and you have a time schedule. But I mean, it's possible that that's a very good segue into looking at Neil in a sense and Reich in terms of understanding some of the nature and function of self-regulation, or what self-regulation is, which is the, and I will really address it in more detail as I move through my presentation, but keep in mind that the fundamental error in thinking about self-regulation and what it means is to assume it means doing whatever you feel like doing whenever you feel like doing it. And in some ways that's a fundamental misconception, particularly it would seem, if one looks at the literature and one looks at the history, probably more in terms of American response to the concepts of self-regulation than European or other areas. But certainly the idea that self-regulation is a license to do your own thing or be your own person at the moment that you feel like being it is really a misconception of the way certainly Reich and Neil and those around them began to develop this concept. Also, one thing should be made clear before we move ahead, is that the term self-regulation is not unique to Reich or Neil in the sense that it's used in various ways in pathophysiology, in various kinds of biological references. Darwin at times uses the term, but the more mechanical scientific use of the term is simply a direct definition of that which is inherently self-regulated, meaning regulating its own function, without any outside or external influence, and that would be more things like histology and various types of and that becomes interesting. Formally, respiration, blood flow, various kinds of physiological functions which are self-regulating. Interesting in terms of Reich's insights and some of his ideas about self-regulation, it's worth looking at. I don't really get into it here. Probably emerged from his first insights into the fact that organisms that were lying before him, in treatment as early as the late 1920s, who should be able to regulate their normal bodily functions and normal physiological functions, were not able to do that. And this began to tie into Reich's interest in the whole process of how naturally functioning organisms become unnatural in their function, or how organisms that should self-regulate without being told how to do it somehow wind up not being able to do it even when they're urged to or helped or even allowed to. To quote Dr. Victor Sobey, it was really a simple matter of trying to figure out why human beings, or most human beings, certainly those human beings who we see in treatment or see in the panorama of people who are in trouble, why most human beings cannot do what a deer in the woods can do, which is basically go out, feed itself, deliver its babies when it has babies, and run when it's scared, and fight when it's threatened, and whatever it has to do. So in one sense, in a nutshell, that's the paradox and the problem of the issue of self-regulation. With that, the question is, what I want to do today is talk about some of the basic concepts, but is always my want is to put it in the historical context, which means to also identify, in this case, at least the three key players in the development of the concept of self-regulation as we understand it and as it impacts on our work as ergonomists or people involved in education who were influenced by Reich and Neal, and there are a few other players of importance. And this afternoon I'll talk about some of the implications of what I'm presenting this morning for what ergonomy is as a treatment, or what the implications are for treatment in general, because in a sense, the value of these insights that Reich presents, certainly in the clinical context, are useful and have influenced significantly other practices, clinical practices, particularly psychoanalysis, which Reich leaves a primary and very fundamental mark on. And actually, just as a little promo, in the fall we're going to do a big day-long colloquium with a number of leading psychoanalysts from the New York Psychoanalytic, Dr. Eric Weissner, probably Dr. John Koblenza, and a few others, and some ergonomists, on the impact of Reich's work on modern psychoanalysis and the critique of modern psychoanalysis of Reich's work, and whether the twain shall ever meet or where they meet, which we're trying to set it up. The problem is that everyone's very excited about it. Psychoanalysts are very excited about it until they have to actually get up publicly, and that sometimes is a little bit harder to manage. It's much easier to get ergonomists up. We're already on the outside. Okay. Let me just quickly turn off my crack barrier here so people don't.
Does that refer to addiction?
Yeah, it's definitely not self-regulating. Okay, in some ways I've begun to address the first issue, and what I'll do is when Dr. Bennett gives me the high sign, I'll leave some time, at least 10 minutes or so, for questions. If there's anything that's really pressing as I go along, just let me finish the thought and then you can ask a question. But otherwise, let me just sort of move through this. Okay? I mean, the first and most common question that people come to this with is what is self-regulation? Now, this school, this is a new building, but my daughter went to the school. This school was founded by people who were, influenced by the ideas of self-regulation. This was a community, sort of co-op school originally. It's now one of the more, the community has changed radically, to say the least, and is no longer, it's self-regulated into a very high-end private school. But that being said, in the 1950s and 60s, self-regulation was a term, and the names Neal and Summerhill, as well as Reich, would be renowned. And I teach at the New School, been there for 30 years, and I ran the psychology program, and I have a sort of an ongoing poll, and every term that I start a class there, I ask if anyone has heard of A.S. Neal. And now this is a place where in the 1960s when I taught there, if I said A.S. Neal, everyone would have, it was a different edition, but they would have had, along with probably The Mass Psychology of Fascism, or maybe, no, actually more The Function of the Orgasm, because that got you more attention on the train when you were riding and reading it. But those things change. You get a lot of people at the New School now, or at NYU, kids, so many of you who teach running this who don't know who Marx was, or they think of Marx as the Marx. I really think it is which Marx brother, So it's a different world. Well, they still know who the Marx brothers are. I guess that's an accomplishment. So anyway, the issue is what is self-regulation, and that's where the problem comes in, because to offer, as I said, to offer a specific and exact definition, in terms of physiological meaning of self-regulation is fairly easy. And when you'll see the term used in contemporary literature, particularly medical and psychological literature, it usually refers to the very simple description of self-regulatory physiological processes and function. That was not what Neal and Reich meant. And the issue of who has priority